leaving a national security meeting, President Trump is talking about Michael Cohen. The lead starts right now. President Trump capping off a bad week with a mouthful, calling Michael Cohen, his former lawyer and fixer, a stone-cold liar in his denial that he ever asked for a pardon, while possibly hinting that he might give a pardon to his former campaign chairman. He reshaped the White House communication team in foxy ways. So what is behind former Fox News exec Bill Shine suddenly bolting from the White House? Plus, he's Kellyanne Conway's husband and a shade machine when it comes to her boss, President Trump. And today, noted conservative attorney George Conway took a break from Twitter and picked up a microphone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We start with the politics lead, with Congress now investigating the litany of potential crimes that President Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen accused him of in his testimony before Congress. The president today escalated the attack on Cohen's credibility, starting with the claim that Cohen directly asked him for a pardon. The president tweeting today, "Bad lawyer and fraudster Michael Cohen said under sworn testimony that he never asked for a pardon. His lawyers totally contradicted him. He lied. Additionally, he directly asked me for a pardon. I said no. He lied again." Highlight that part. He directly asked me for a pardon. That contradicts Cohen's testimony under oath to Congress.
I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
As Cohen and his lawyers try to explain the discrepancy, the president is also trying to use comments made during the sentencing of Paul Manafort, his former campaign chair, as further evidence of his own innocence. CNN's Caitlin Collins now starts us off from the White House.
Michael Cohen lied about the pardon.
President Trump in a battle for the truth with his former attorney and fixer today.
He's lied about a lot of things, but when he lied about the pardon, that was really a lie. And he knew all about pardons. His lawyers said that they went to my lawyers and asked for pardons.
Trump later claiming Michael Cohen, quote, directly asked me for a pardon. I said no. He lied again. The president escalating his attacks on Cohen's credibility after he testified last week that Trump lied about his business dealings with Russia and hush money payments to women.
And I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
Cohen quickly firing back, calling it just another set of lies. Trump going after Cohen after being asked about Paul Manafort, his former campaign chairman who was sentenced to almost 4 years in prison for cheating on his taxes and committing bank fraud.
I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. I think it's been a very, very tough time for him.
The president twisting the words of the judge who sentenced Manafort.
But if you notice, both his lawyer, a highly respected man, and a very highly respected judge. The judge said there was no collusion with Russia.
During Manafort's hearing, Judge T.S. Ellis drew a distinction between his crimes and the special counsel's investigation, noting Manafort was, quote, not before this court for anything having to do with collusion with the Russian government to influence the election. The president and his staff refusing to close the door on a pardon for Manafort. Has the president ruled out a pardon for Paul Manafort?
I haven't discussed that with the president. I haven't heard him say that.
Now, Jake, even as the president has gone about his job here, sources say he has become increasingly preoccupied with Michael Cohen. He brings him up minutes after he gets out of national security briefings, talks about him during phone calls with lawmakers, and even mentions him during strategy sessions with aides where he's discussing his administration's priorities. He's essentially become this figure that looms over the White House.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thank you so much. Let's chat about this with my experts here. Pamela Brown, one of our White House correspondents. The president's contradicting Cohen about this pardon issue more than a week after Cohen made the claim. Why?
So I asked Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, the same question. And basically he said, look, we were also focused on this idea that he said he never wanted to work in the White House. And we had all these other witnesses come forward and said they did. And basically our thinking was we'll just hand DOJ confidential information about this, about the pardons. But then the news stories about all of it and the contradictions that have come out in the last 24 hours sort of forced our hand. So he tried to say it was some sort of strategy that they were dishing this stuff out and that they wanted to go to DOJ. I think, Jake, that also what could have happened is that the president's on Air Force One. He's talking to people on Air Force One and sends out a tweet on a whim. I mean, we've seen him do that before as well because all of these news stories have gained so much traction. But what will be interesting to see is what the answer is to the president potentially being a witness in any potential perjury investigation. I mean, he's basically saying that Michael Cohen committed perjury, so would he be a witness if there's an investigation? That's a looming question.
And Seung-Min, you're familiar with this, but the president even talked with reporters on his way out to Air Force One about this whole pardon issue and didn't bring up the claim he later made. Take a listen.
I know that in watching and seeing you folks at night, that Michael Cohen lied about the pardons. His lawyer said that they went to my lawyers and asked for pardons. And I could go a step above that, but I won't go do it now.
Well, maybe he did then just a little bit. He gets on the plane.
Well, we've seen how sometimes the president can be a little bit more aggressive behind the Twitter handle than maybe he is. Even if he had all that time with the reporters. But it's so interesting to me over and over how the president and his aides refuse to rule out the potential pardon for Manafort. I think we've seen how the president over time has treated the cases of Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen differently, whereas, he has been sympathetic towards Manafort, not so much towards Cohen. And this is something that we have asked him over and over. I mean, is this something that you are going to take off the table? And I think especially now with a House majority led by Democrats, they're already saying we're proposing legislation to kind of restrict the president on this or have some oversight of the president's pardon power. And obviously they have the investigative power to ask a lot of questions about this.
And Paul, the president does have an argument to make that Michael Cohen is not being honest, given that Michael Cohen's own attorney, Lanny Davis, yesterday issued a statement saying prior to Michael Cohen's decision to leave the Joint Defense Group and tell the truth on July 2nd, 2018, Michael was open to the ongoing dangling of a possible pardon by Trump representatives privately in the media. The statement goes on to say, after July 2nd, Cohen authorized him as a new lawyer to say publicly he would never accept a pardon. But, I mean, it does seem as though there were attempts by his attorneys to suss out the pardon option.
Right, and that's not what Mr. Cohen said in his testimony. He didn't say, well, before July 2nd, when I became a good guy, I did.
Right.
This is the problem, though, for our president. Michael Cohen is a liar. Admitted liar, confessed liar, convicted liar, felonious liar. And by a 50 to 35 margin in the Quinnipiac poll, the American people believe him over our president. Because as big a liar as Michael Cohen is, the American people think their president is an even bigger liar. And that's a sad statement.
Doug, the House Oversight Committee Chairman Elijah Cummings said today he's reviewing Michael Cohen's testimony, and he said he would nail him to the cross, Cohen to the cross, if he lied again, an interesting metaphor in the spring season, if he lied again. I mean, this doesn't look like it's going to end well for Michael Cohen.
It's not going to end well for Michael Cohen. I think the question is, how badly does this end for Donald Trump? Because you have so many people who are speaking out against him. And even if Cohen is telling one version of a truth one day, another version of it another day, or a lie, it all adds up to basically negative approval rating for Donald Trump. And so the 55% that you mentioned, that's pretty close to what his disapproval is pretty often. So if you say something bad about Trump, people are going to believe it.
I do want to bring up the Manafort plea, the sentencing rather. The president trying to hype a comment made by the Judge T.S. Ellis in the Manafort case. The judge said, quote, Manafort is not before the court for anything having to do with colluding with the Russian government. In the president's view, that becomes both the judge and the lawyer in the Manafort case stated loudly and for the world to hear that there was no collusion with Russia, but the witch hunt continues. It's a big difference between saying he's not here for anything having to do with collusion and the judge said there is no collusion. In fact, one might even say that that's a lie.
Exactly. I mean, the judge flat out did not say there is no collusion whatsoever in this investigation. It's just that it is true that Manafort was not charged with crimes relating to collusion with Russians. But interestingly, I think you all probably noticed the statement that Manafort's attorney put out after saying, again, reiterating, there is no collusion that my client took a part of, or whatever the words were. And a lot of reporters viewed that as sort of a plea to President Trump for a pardon.
Interesting. One last thing I want to get your reaction to, Doug. The president had another stunner as he made his way to Air Force One, talking about that anti-hate bill and the fact that Democrats, in the view of critics, watered down the bill that was supposed to be attacking anti-Semitism. It became an attack on bigotry writ large, although there was certainly a lot about anti-Semitism in there. Here's what the president had to say.
anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party. And I thought that vote was a disgrace. And so does everybody else if you get an honest answer.
The Anti-Defamation League condemned that, saying that the anti-Semitism shouldn't be politicized. The Democrats have become an anti-Jewish party? That's not true.
No, it's not at all. And unfortunately, this is what Donald Trump does so often. He makes an outrageous statement to distract us away from whatever the other bad news that he has dealing with that day, whether it's the bad jobs numbers today or what we were just talking about with Michael Cohen, so that we focus on this. But it's obviously, and I'll say, having worked for Eric Cantor, who is the highest ranking Jewish elected Republican, it's not true. And the statements that we heard from so many House Democrats this week was that they were angry that this was watered down. And unfortunately, I think we'll probably have the same conversation again in the coming weeks, because there will be more instances of this.
What is the situation here, Paul? Is it just nobody likes to criticize bigots or people with prejudice in their own party? Is that the issue?
That may be part of it. You don't want to take on you don't want to take on your own team. But it's also hard to argue against expanding the critique. In other words, if you say anti-Semitism is wrong, and it is, and it's always wrong, it's kind of hard to say, well, Islamophobia is okay, or other attacks are okay. And I suspect that's why the House leadership expanded that resolution. But for our president, who was called out by the ADL for his final ad in the campaign, they said it was anti-Semitic because he targeted Janet Yellen, George Soros, somebody else, all happened to be Jews.
Lloyd Blankfein.
Lloyd Blankfein, thank you, a Wall Street financier, as the enemies of the people. ADL thought that was anti-Semitic. When he spoke to the, I think it's Jewish Republican group.
Republican Jewish Coalition.
He said, I don't want your money. I don't need your money, so you can't control me. That's the self-same anti-Semitic trope that this young freshman congresswoman in her first weeks in Congress is rightly being criticized for. So the president here is projecting a little.
All right, everyone stick around. We've got a lot more to talk about after a rough week of headlines. President Trump's communications director, an alum of his darling Fox News channel, is out the door. But there's more to this backstory than fallout and fury over a judge handing down a lighter than expected sentence for Trump's campaign chair, Paul Manafort. But his prison time could soon become much longer. How? We'll explain. Stay with us. Trod Departure Lounge right outside the Oval Office. White House Communications Director Bill Shine announced that he's stepping down from his job today. As sources tell CNN, President Trump had started to question Shine's judgment. The former top executive for Fox News now plans to be an advisor to Trump's reelection campaign, a move that campaign staffers apparently learned about just this morning. CNN's Caitlin Collins is back with us from the White House. And Caitlin, sources tell you the president was not overly enthusiastic about the job Shine was doing.
That's right, Jake. He had been privately complaining behind the scenes that the guy he brought in to get him better coverage had not gotten him better coverage. Now, in the statement the president put out today, he was glowing about Shine, announcing that he's going to his 2020 re-election campaign, is going to be totally involved. But sources say that's likely just more of a cover story to save face, because this is such an abrupt departure. And this is abrupt. People inside the West Wing were pretty caught off guard by this announcement that he's leaving. But there was a little bit of a hint that this could be happening, because Bill Shine had been slated to go on the president's trip to Vietnam last week for that second nuclear summit, but he unexpectedly dropped off just 2 days before. Now, he's been in the spotlight. The president had been complaining about his role here, and aides had criticized him privately, even though they liked him, saying they didn't feel like he had a real communication strategy developed, even though he had been here for several months. Now, Jake, the question is, who is going to take this job? Because at least 6 people have already had this job in just the short time that President Trump has been in office. And now people inside the White House are wondering who is going to be number 7.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thanks so much. Let's dive into this again. Sung Min, let me ask you, first of all, the CNN is reporting the president had been souring on Shine because the press coverage had not been getting better. Is that Shine's fault, or is it the fault of the person who is being covered, who is doing and saying a lot of things that are controversial?
Well, CNN's reporting does match up with our reporting on the matter. That was that the president had specifically brought him on to improve his media coverage. Clearly it hasn't, and he had partly blamed Bill Shine for that. But the problem here that we see in the White House over and over again is that, in terms of their messaging strategy, is that the communications director, at the end of the day, the real one is Donald Trump himself. And he sets the message. He throws the office, whatever they try to do, off message with his tweets, with his the impromptu gaggles that he has at different, pool sprays and whatnot. And it's difficult for any press office to form a message around that. And he has gone through about half a dozen communications directors already. We're about halfway through his presidency. And that's not even, and that is one critical vacancy, but there are so many other vacancies within the White House and in the administration right now, and that's really telling of the difficulty of working under this particular president.
Pamela, you're a White White House correspondent as well. What's your experience with Mr. Schein? How did he try to shape coverage?
Well, my experience was he was there, as you pointed out, to be an attack dog for Trump against reporters and to try to, in some ways, bully reporters into better coverage. I mean, this was an experience I had, and it was a pattern of behavior. You know, he did it to Caitlyn when he kicked her out of the Rose Garden event for questions she asked. I had my own experience just a few weeks ago with him after this exchange with the president in the Oval Office.
Mr. President, did you talk to your intelligence chiefs today about the displeasure you had with their testimony?
I did, and they said that they were totally misquoted and they were totally, it was taken out of context. So what I do is I'd suggest that you call them. They said it was fake news, so which frankly didn't surprise me.
Well, we just ran exactly what they said to Congress.
Excuse me. It didn't surprise me at all.
So he took issue.
He took issue. So he brought me into his office and told me that I was a nice person, but that I was totally out of line and rude in that exchange with the president. First, he went after the questions I asked and said they were completely inappropriate. And when I pushed back and said, I just asked if he expressed his displeasure with his intel chiefs after he tweeted they should go back to school. Mm-hmm. And then he said something ridiculous in that they were misquoted, but we just played what they said in an open hearing. He then shifted to, well, my tone was really rude and my tone was really inappropriate. And then he went on to say that the president is one of the bravest people he knows, but that he is the president, we should be nicer to him. Now, one of the things, just sitting in his office, it was kind of a surreal experience and remarkable to think this is the White House communications director. And does he understand the role of the media covering the president, the most powerful person in the world? My job isn't to be nice or mean. It's to cover the White House fairly, accurately, and to ask tough questions. And so that was my experience.
So in Schein's defense, we should note that we're just over 2 years into Trump's presidency, and President Trump has gone through a lot of communications directors. There was Sean Spicer, Mike Dubke, Anthony Scaramucci, Hope Hicks. I think Spicer was back in the role at one point in there somewhere. Now we have Bill Schein. At some points, you have to ask, is the problem the advertising or is the problem the dog food?
Right. You know, the Washington Capitals are getting really good press lately. They won 5 in a row. That's why. They won the Stanley Cup last year. That's why. If he performs well, he'll get good press. And it's always the case. By the way, you know, I used to work in the White House and I used to tell President Clinton, we said, we have a communications problem. I said, you know, the Titanic didn't have a communications problem. It had an iceberg problem. The Trump presidency has an iceberg problem. It's not, he can run through 6 more communications director. He has to do a better job as president, and he'll get better press then.
I should note that I did see efforts of Bill Schein behind the scenes trying to improve relations with CNN on a personal level. So I did see efforts of that, maybe not with frontline reporters like yourself, but at some point, you know, you have to wonder. And look, you're somebody that worked in communications. I know everybody always wants to blame the communications department, right? That's all. We have a communications problem. I remember this during the Obama years. We have a communications problem. We have a communications problem. That's not the problem. The problem is the Obamacare website doesn't work. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know, we spend so much time talking about how Donald Trump is an atypical politician. In this way, he's very typical. Every politician that any campaign person or congressional staffers work for always blames the communications director. And Lord help you when they start talking about getting a Manhattan Madison Avenue firm to come help, which has probably happened in this White House as well. But then Trump has the problem of who's going to accept this job now? Given that, I think Paul Kane, your colleague from the Post, tweeted today that the White House communications director is a bit like being the drummer in Spinal Tap. Right. Eventually, you're going to spontaneously combust. Right. And after you've seen the churning of staff that's gone through, it's going to be difficult for them to fill this role.
And also just to say, too, just to kind of round out my experience, I had limited interactions with him because I was away on maternity leave when he came on board. But it really was an impossible job. I mean, he was tasked by the president to shape the coverage and make it better for him. I mean, and like you pointed out, who's responsible for negative coverage? Is it the president himself or is it the communications director? The communications director can't control the president and his tweets and things that sometimes bring on that negative coverage. So it was an impossible job. And we joke that job is cursed, right? I mean, no one can seem to hang on to it very long or do an effective job in the president's eyes.
So he's joining the campaign. He's going to be advisor to the Trump reelection campaign. The New York Times is reporting that that's more of a face-saving announcement than it is a real one. What do you know about that? What do you know about who might be next in line to take on this job?
Well, that is still something that we're reporting at, particularly the one who will replace him. But this is also what we have a pattern, an issue that we have seen with the White House. Again, there is a departure, whether, it could be abrupt like this one or another one, but there is no person to take over in that role. I think another very prominent recent example of this was when John Kelly was on his way out at the end of last year. You saw a lot of public trial balloons for different potential chiefs of staff that just go pop pretty quickly, such as Chris Christie and others. And finally, they put Mick Mulvaney there as the acting chief of staff. And that's what happens time and time again. Someone leaves, there's no one to replace him. We are still waiting for a successor to James Mattis, who resigned from his position late last year as well. And that is, again, these critical positions that are not getting filled at this time.
Yeah, they have acting Secretary of Defense, acting Chief of Staff, but no one permanent. Stick around, everyone. He spent a lifetime getting rich off of brutal dictators and big tobacco and Ukrainian gangsters. Will Paul Manafort get his due next week when he is sentenced by a different judge? Stay with us. Internationally today, critics are assailing the sentence handed down to Paul Manafort in Virginia. Judge T.S. Ellis sentenced Manafort to 47 months in prison. That's 15 years less than the suggested minimum. Senator Kamala Harris weighing in on the sentence just moments ago.
We are looking at further evidence in America's judicial system of absolute unfairness, where white collar versus other kinds of crimes does not, this is what I say. People commit white collar crimes, they should be prepared to bring their toothbrush and spend as much time behind bars as anybody else.
As CNN's Sarah Murray reports, however, it's possible that during next week's sentencing in D.C., the former Trump campaign chair might receive a much tougher penalty.
Critics say Paul Manafort got off easy. But next week, he'll come face to face with another judge who may take a harsher view of Manafort's crimes.
I'm surprised at the sentence.
Judge Amy Berman Jackson is set to sentence Manafort for conspiracy and witness tampering, crimes that carry a maximum sentence of 10 years. In deciding whether to impose that maximum sentence, Jackson could also weigh the fact that Manafort continued to commit crimes even after he was arrested, and later lied to investigators when he was supposed to be cooperating. A federal judge in Virginia Thursday sentenced Manafort, President Trump's former campaign chairman, to nearly 4 years in prison, far less than the recommended sentence of 19 to 25 years.
This sentence, in my view, failed to do justice to the very serious crimes that Manafort has committed, as well as his utter disrespect for the law.
The comments Manafort's lawyer made after his client's sentencing only further inflamed Democrats.
There is absolutely no evidence that Paul Manafort was involved with any collusion with any government official from Russia.
The Intelligence Committee
Adam Schiff, the Democrat chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, fired back via Twitter, saying the statement by Paul Manafort's lawyer after an already lenient sentence, repeating the president's mantra of no collusion, was no accident. It was a deliberate appeal for a pardon. In deciding Manafort's sentence, Judge T.S. Ellis called the recommendations excessive and claimed that Manafort lived an otherwise blameless life. But his resume shows a complicated picture. Manafort spent a lifetime enriching himself with lobbying work for dictators and regimes with abysmal human rights records, like former Philippine leader Ferdinand Marcos, whose image Manafort tried to bolster in Washington after decades of his brutal rule. When he was light on cash, Manafort turned to a Russian oligarch for millions of dollars that Manafort never appeared to repay, according to witness testimony at his trial. Later, he built ties with Ukrainian oligarchs with close ties to the Kremlin and stashed the millions he earned from them in foreign bank accounts. As part of his illegal lobbying work, Manafort even pushed news stories in 2012 designed to paint President Obama's administration as anti-Semitic, according to court documents. For their part, prosecutors reached back nearly a decade to document Manafort's history of tax fraud, hiding foreign bank accounts, and defrauding banks, leading to his 8 convictions in Virginia.
Now, Manafort faces a maximum of 10 years when he's sentenced in D.C., but it's going to be more difficult for him and his lawyers to make the argument that the judge should not give him the maximum. This is a case where Paul Manafort actually pleaded guilty, and as part of that guilty plea, he acknowledged a number of other crimes and actually signed a document saying that he deserves 17 to 22 years in prison. Jake.
All right, Sarah Murray, thanks so much. Joining me now are 2 former federal prosecutors. Elliot Williams is also a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Justice Department. Gene Rossi is the former Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. And Gene, let me start with you. You prosecuted cases in front of Judge Ellis for more than 2 decades. You say the sentence is not completely surprising. Why not?
Well, for 20 years, I tried 7 cases in front of Judge Ellis, and it's like a Marine going to Paris Island, and I've been to the island 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't agree with his sentence. I'm not surprised, and here's why. I've been in front of Judge Ellis so many times I can't count, and I've seen him with a defendant who is 70 years old, apparently has health issues, has been completely humiliated, him and his family. And here's the rub. He doesn't like the case. Mm-hmm. And I have tried cases in front of Judge Ellis, and when he doesn't like the case, it is awful. Mm-hmm. And that's the main thing. He came out yesterday and said there's no Russian collusion before they even started the hearing. So he's kind of showing his hand. So I'm not surprised. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with it. But that's what Judge Ellis has done.
And Elliot, Mueller's team still has the upcoming sentencing for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who admitted to lying to the FBI, Manafort's business partner Rick Gates, who pleaded guilty to lying to Mueller's team. Roger Stone hasn't even gone to trial yet. How might the Manafort sentencing affect those cases, if at all?
Well, I don't think they'll affect those cases. I still think it's striking, given how low the sentence was in relation to the federal sentencing guidelines. Right. You had potentially a 293-month maximum that this could have been sentenced at, and he got sentenced down to 47 months. So it's, when the judges have a tremendous amount of discretion when they're deciding how to sentence somebody, and I think, perhaps the judges there will exercise that discretion in the same way. Look, at the end of the day, it's a lot of people with proximity to the president who keep pleading or getting convicted of serious offenses. Now, that's not to implicate the president in any crimes or anything like that, but you got to question who an individual's friends are when everybody's getting locked up or going to jail.
Yeah, and Gene, you talked about Judge Ellis not liking this case. He made it very clear last year. He was skeptical of the prosecutor's intentions. He told them, you don't really care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud. You really care about what information Mr. Manafort can give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump or lead to his prosecution or impeachment. Manafort's next sentencing is in front of a judge who has actually shown frustration with Manafort so far, not with the prosecutors, because Manafort broke the bail terms she set, broke the gag order she set, allegedly committed additional crimes while out on bail, and then broke the plea agreement. Do you suspect that this new judge, not new judge, but the D.C. judge next week will go harder on him?
You know the old saying, if you pray for something hard enough, you're going to get it. They got a light sentence relatively from Judge Ellis. But I predict this. Judge Jackson is going to go postal. She's a former prosecutor. And what Paul Manafort did was he agreed to cooperate, accept all this responsibility, and then he lied. And I predict she's going to probably give him 5 to 10 years consecutive because of the light sentence that Judge Ellis gave.
Not concurrent, not at the same time.
Consecutive, or give 10 concurrent, so he gets at least 10 years.
On top of that, I actually think it's more likely now, after that 47-month sentence, that she does go consecutive. Yep. Just because, tacking time onto a 47-month sentence is very different than tacking time on to a 293-month sentence. And so it's a different playing field now. And she's shown frustration with Stone, with Manafort, and all of these folks who are lying to her and sort of thumbing their nose at the processes in court. So even if she doesn't go the full 10, right, I think it gets that consecutive.
I wanted to add this. I've been praising the special counsel's office, and I know 5 of them. I trained 5 people in that office. They're brilliant. I got to tell you, they made an unforced error. Here's how. They didn't ask for a specific sentence. They filed a sentencing memo, say, here are the guidelines. When I was a prosecutor, I stood up and I owned it. I said, Your Honor, I think he should get 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
But not a range. You would just say specific.
You just
15.
Don't file a memo. And I hate to even criticize them because I know these people well. Yeah. You don't just file a memo and say, okay, Judge, you decide. You gotta own it.
There would still have been a range, but the special counsel team didn't push for something specific in the range.
And Elliot, let me ask you also, because there's a lot of criticism, especially by politicians and also by defense attorneys out there saying this is not the sentence that a poor person or a person of color would have received for the same. Because how much did he not pay in taxes? $25 million? I mean, it's not difficult to find. There's that African-American woman who voted
Yes.
when she wasn't allowed to vote because she was on probation. She's doing 5 years in prison.
Jake, this isn't a fringe theory or anything. Just look at the statistics and look at the numbers. And it's a decision that society has made to poo-poo and look past the serious conduct of white-collar criminals. And again, the mere fact that we're even talking about a 48-month sentence is indicative of the fact that this is a white-collar crime. If this were, if this were any number of other crimes or even some other financial crimes, many judges wouldn't have batted an eye to sentence within that range. But because it's a wealthy, moneyed, white-collar defendant, society just sort of tolerates it. It's odd.
Thank you so much, Dean and Elliot. Really appreciate it. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Most 2020 presidential candidates have been running for a few weeks, but there's one Democrat who's been on the trail for 2 years, and you might not have ever even heard of him. Who is it? We'll tell you next. Stay with us.
213-8000.
Our 2020 lead, presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren, promoting tonight a plan to break up tech giants such as Amazon. Literally in the same New York neighborhood, Amazon was going to build their second headquarters, but ultimately dropped their plans after backlash from many progressives in the community. Let's chew on this. Take a listen to Warren explaining what she views as the problem when tech giants get competition.
They can say, we better get better fast. We better tighten up our data protection and privacy. Or they can say, yeah, we got $1 zillion. Let's just eat them up. Let's just buy them. That's what's happened with these mergers. They're buying up their competition.
So what do you think, Doug? I mean, breaking up the Republican at the table, you think this is a good idea? Do you think this might appeal to Democrats?
I think it can appeal to a certain portion of Democrats. Democrats typically don't like the word big on anything. Big business, big tobacco, now big tech. And I think it also tells us how Democrats are starting to look at the fundraising in a way that they didn't 4 years ago or 8 years ago. Clearly, Elizabeth Warren, who's sworn off PAC money, isn't going to be relying on Silicon Valley for fundraising. She's looking at small dollars. What the question is going to be, do other Democrats follow her on this?
But actually, my question is, how many Republicans will? I think this cuts across, Doug, in a really interesting way. It's the first idea of the presidential election that I think has tremendous cross-cutting potential. At the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee meeting last week, Josh Hawley, the new freshman senator from Missouri, gave this scorching speech about big tech, attacking big tech. My friends, and I do have some, who are Trump-loving conservatives, hate big tech. I'm serious. It's not entirely impossible that Donald Trump signs on to the Elizabeth Warren attacks on big tech.
So Warren's tech plan has two major proposals. It would reverse high-profile mergers, such as Facebook buying Instagram or Amazon acquiring Whole Foods. It would also force companies who earn $25 billion or more annually to spin off part of their company. It's a pretty aggressive plan. I mean, it is true that a lot of conservatives don't like tech. They think they're being censored by Twitter and Google, for example. But I mean, to say $25 billion or more, you have to spin it off. That's pretty revolutionary.
It is. It's revolutionary. And just big picture here, there was a time when Democrats wanted to align themselves with tech companies, you may recall. And so it is just so interesting now after this sort of fall from grace in public relations from Facebook and other companies with privacy scandals and misinformation that now you're seeing a Democratic candidate on the campaign trail put forward these aggressive policies. And it will be interesting to see if any other Democrats follow suit.
Do you think this is going to force other candidates, other Democrats especially, to propose similar measures?
Well, I am actually really interested in what, if anything, Kamala Harris says in response, because Silicon Valley is her current constituency as a senator from California. So I think how she calibrates that issue would be really fascinating to watch. But also on so many other issues we've seen in this Democratic primary so far, once someone says something or does something or aligns themselves, it does get to this push to the left or in other various stances. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of a movement coming up soon.
Something I wanted to bring up, the New York Times had a profile of Joe Biden, the former vice president, talking about how he potentially is going to run for president. He's 95% there. And one thing that was in the story that was very interesting were the fact that his aides keep telling him to stop telling stories about how well he worked with very, very conservative, racist senators in days past, such as Jesse Helms of North Carolina. Here's an example of the kind of thing they want him to stop doing.
Jesse Helms, the last part of his career. Jesse Helms worked with me. I remember one day walking in at the end of May, and Jesse Helms from North Carolina, who was a very, very tough guy and a bit of a racist. No, for real.
So the argument is people don't want to hear, Democrats don't want to hear about how great you worked with Jesse Helms or Strom Thurmond or whatever. But that's who Joe Biden is. He likes to work across the aisle.
Yeah, I think it's what would make Biden potentially a very good president, but not a great candidate running for the Democrat. My first job in politics was making $5 an hour for Jesse Helms' 1990 campaign. So I always have a soft spot in my heart for him, knowing that those politics are well past where we are right now. And if you're a Democrat, being Jesse Helms' favorite Democrat or Strom Thurmond's favorite Democrat is really poison as you go in this process. It's also why Joe Biden's best day as a candidate may be his first day, and every day after tougher.
Yeah, and Joe has to be Joe. And he does work across the aisle, and he has. And if he abandons that, he's abandoning his true self in much the ways people criticized Al Gore for not running strictly or more focused on the environment. When the vice president was attacked by Cynthia Nixon, the actor and failed Democratic candidate for governor in New York, for calling Mike Pence a decent guy, Joe Biden should not have folded. He should have said, he's a decent guy with whom I disagree. Love the sinner, hate the sin. That's what we do in our party. And he could have made this a terrific moment of strength for himself instead of bowing down to the first actor who criticized him.
As the Democratic field gets pulled to the left, the president has been capitalizing off of it, slamming what he calls a growing threat of socialism. But as CNN's Jeff Zeleny reports for us now, there is at least one Democratic presidential candidate actively attempting to swim against that tide.
In a presidential race with no shortage of bold-faced Democratic names, there's one candidate who's been running for nearly 2 years, who you may never have heard of.
I'm John Delaney, and I approve this message.
Yet he has more than 3 dozen visits to Iowa and New Hampshire already under his belt.
I've been to all 99 counties.
John Delaney is running for president, and after logging more miles than most candidates combined, the former Maryland congressman and businessman has a warning for Democrats trying to win back the White House.
Do you wonder if the party is moving so far to the left that will ensure the re-election of President Trump?
I do worry about that. I mean, if the party starts embracing kind of, if you will, socialism in a pure form, I think that's a really big mistake, right? Because it's not good policy, and it's definitely not good politics.
Running from the middle, Delaney faces an uphill climb, even if he was a household name like many other Democrats in the race. But he believes it's time to speak truth to power, namely the progressive ideas driving the Democratic primary.
But I don't agree with the Green New Deal. Right, I'll just say it.
Climate change.
He compares the chances of passing the current version of the Green New Deal to Mexico paying for Trump's border wall. He's promising a different way.
The things I want to do are very consistent with what progressives care about, but I'm very focused